I never thought a broken radiator could make me feel this nervous. The shop smelled of motor oil and hot metal, a smell I'd usually associate with sweat and grime, not anticipation. But there she was, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, dark silk scarf hanging loose around her neck, hair brushing the top of her shoulders in that effortless way that made everything else in the room blur. Need something fixed, or just browsing? Her voice cut through the clatter of tools, smooth and deliberate, like she knew she owned the space even if she didn't. I cleared my throat, trying to seem casual. Just the radiator. She smiled then, not the polite, obligatory kind, but that fraction of a second smile that seemed to acknowledge I was both invisible and fascinating all at once. Her eyes flicked over me sharp, but not unkind, and something in the way she lingered made my stomach tighten. Her name's Margot, I reminded myself. Mid-40s, confident, poised, the sort of woman who could make a guy feel like he'd stumbled into someone else's world by accident. I'd worked at this repair shop for almost a year, and somehow, she'd slipped into my life like a quiet current I didn't notice until it tugged at my chest. Can I help you figure out what's wrong? Her tone had that edge that suggested she could fix anything except the quiet tension hovering between us. I swallowed. Yeah, I think it's the radiator. My voice sounded too high, too eager. She tilted her head, studying me the way someone reads a book they've read too many times, noticing something new every time. And then, that pause. God, that pause. A wrench slipped from the bench behind me, clanging to the floor, but neither of us moved to pick it up. She just watched me. I wanted to speak, but my words seemed to evaporate. Instead, I bent slightly to grab the tool, brushing her hand in the process. The contact was brief, meaningless on paper, but it felt like electricity arcing through my skin. You're careful, she said softly, almost teasing, but her gaze stayed on mine. Yeah, well, I trailed off, unsure what I was supposed to say, my brain deciding it was safer to fumble. I like to do things right. Her lips curved again, and she bit her lower lip. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. That tiny movement carried some weight, like a signal only I could pick up, and it sent my pulse racing. I knew she noticed me noticing, and that knowledge made the air between us heavier, more charged. I cleared the sweat from my palms, pretending to check the radiator, though I couldn't stop stealing glances at her. She moved to the counter, picked up a rag, and wiped her hands slowly, deliberately, making the simplest act feel intimate. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the way she crossed her legs at the chair, the pause in her breath, told a story I wasn't sure I was ready to read. Then she leaned slightly closer, almost imperceptibly, and whispered, "If you walk away, I'll lose control." Her words hung there, fragile but impossible to ignore. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask what she meant, to laugh it off, to pretend I hadn't felt that tiny spark ignite, but I stayed rooted. My hands still on the radiator, my eyes on hers, I realized I hadn't been this aware of someone in forever. And as I walked home later, I kept seeing the curve of her lips, the tension in that brief whisper, and I couldn't stop thinking. What the hell was I supposed to do with a woman like Margot? The next time I saw Margot, it wasn't in the shop. She'd asked me to help her move some old furniture in the small apartment above the bookstore she managed. I wasn't sure why she picked me, probably just needed an extra pair of hands, but the air between us felt electric from the moment I climbed the narrow staircase. Her place smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books, the kind of warm, slightly musty scent that made me want to sink in and stay. Margot stood by the window, arms crossed again, watching the light shift across the room. She looked tired, more than I'd realized before, her shoulders sloping just slightly, her jaw tight. "You sure you can lift that?" she asked, nodding toward a heavy wooden desk. Her voice had its usual confidence, but there was a pause, just a fraction of hesitation, that made it softer, almost human. "I'll manage," I said, trying to sound casual, though my stomach twisted in anticipation. As we worked together, I couldn't stop noticing the little things. The way her fingers flexed around the edge of the desk, the small wrinkle forming between her brows when she strained, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air after she moved past me. She laughed once when the desk wobbled too much, a short, almost apologetic sound, and my chest tightened. It was such a small sound, yet it echoed in me longer than it should. She kept her distance, but there were moments, tiny ones, when her guard slipped. Like when she paused mid-step to brush a strand of hair behind her ear, or when her gaze softened for a second, almost as if she'd forgotten I was there. Those fleeting glimpses made me want to lean in closer, to cross the invisible line that neither of us admitted existed. At one point, she sighed and sank onto the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I didn't think moving all this stuff would be this exhausting, she admitted, voice low. It was the first time she'd sounded unsure, like the polished exterior had cracked. My instinct was to say something clever or helpful, but all I could do was sit on the floor across from her and watch her fingers play with the edge of a rug, noticing how her knuckles whitened from tension. I wanted to reach out, just to touch her hand, maybe steady her, but didn't. Instead, I let my eyes follow the small gestures, the slight tremble in her wrist, the way her shoulders hunched when she leaned forward, the faint exhale she didn't realize she was holding. Vulnerability wrapped around her like a shadow I wasn't supposed to see, and it made the pull between us feel heavier, more dangerous. When she finally looked up, our eyes met, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. She smiled, a tiny, almost embarrassed curl of the lips, and there was something in it that felt like an invitation, but also a warning. My heart raced, but my mouth stayed shut, letting the tension stretch just a little longer. And then she whispered, almost to herself, I shouldn't let anyone see this side of me. I wanted to tell her I already had, but I only nodded, letting her uncertainty and my fascination sit in the air between us, humming quietly like a live wire neither of us dared touch. The rain had started just as we left the bookstore, drumming a steady rhythm against the cobblestone streets. Margot's umbrella had blown inside out once already, leaving her hair damp at the edges, and I couldn't stop noticing how the wet strands clung to her neck. We walked shoulder to shoulder, but not touching. Too close, not close enough, like some invisible line stretched between us. Inside the tiny cafe across the street, the warmth hit us immediately. The smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around us like a soft blanket. We took a corner table near the fogged-up window. She shook off her coat, the damp fabric slipping from her shoulders, revealing a dark green sweater that fit her just right. Familiar, but somehow new every time I saw her. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh, but my voice got caught somewhere in my chest. Instead, I studied her hands as she stirred her tea, long, elegant fingers brushing the spoon, tracing the rim of the cup. Do you ever? She started, and then stopped. Her words hovered, unfinished, leaving space for meaning that wasn't there, or maybe was. Her gaze flicked away to the rain outside. Do I ever what? I asked softly, careful not to push, but desperate to fill the silence. Do I ever regret things? She finished, almost a whisper. She didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of her confession anyway. I wanted to lean across the table, close the gap, touch her hand, but I stayed. Instead, I nodded slowly, letting her words settle between us. The storm outside picked up, rattling the windows. A phone buzzed on the table. Her ex, I assumed, though I didn't ask. She glanced at it, thumb hovering, then silenced it without answering. Something passed over her face in that brief moment. Hesitation, a flicker of guilt, maybe shame. And I realized she carried pieces of other lives she hadn't fully unpacked yet. I didn't know if I should say something, anything, or just watch her, silent and careful. I wanted to make a move, to cross the distance that stretched taut between us, but I didn't. Not yet. My restraint felt both protective and maddening. We talked about small things after that. Books, the storm, the cafe's peculiar wallpaper, but underneath it, the air hummed with unspoken tension. Every glance lingered a little too long. Every brush of our knees under the table made my stomach twist. And then, almost instinctively, I reached out, just a fraction, to steady the cup she'd knocked slightly with her elbow. Our fingers brushed, just for a heartbeat, and I felt it. A spark, small but undeniable. She froze, eyes widening, lips parted, and I could see the struggle in her expression, part wanting, part fear. The moment stretched impossibly long, the kind of silence that screams louder than words. And then, almost painfully, she shifted, pulling her hand back, clearing her throat. Sorry. That's silly. I swallowed, heart racing, hands trembling slightly from the contact we'd almost shared. Outside, the storm continued its rhythm, echoing the tension we'd left unresolved at the table. I wanted to say something, but all I could do was nod, my mind already replaying that fleeting brush of fingers over and over. And as we left the cafe, umbrellas clashing and rain dripping down the back of my jacket, I realized I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about that near moment, about her hand, her eyes, the way she almost let herself. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes after I arrived at her apartment. The storm had passed, leaving the city dripping in gray, puddles reflecting the dull streetlights outside. I took off my coat and hung it on the rack, but every motion felt amplified, my fingers brushing the fabric, the faint squeak of the hanger, the echo of the hallway. Margot was on the couch, knees drawn up, hands clasped loosely around them. Her eyes were on the floor, not on me. She'd been quiet all evening, a subtle weight pressing down, heavier than any words I could force into the room. "Do you ever wonder what the hell we're doing?" she asked finally, voice low, careful, as if speaking too loudly would break something fragile in the air. I froze. The question didn't feel like an accusation. Exactly. It felt like a confession. And suddenly, all the unspoken tension, the brush of hands, the near moment at the cafe, the electricity of small gestures, it all collided at once. I don't know. I admitted, quietly, my throat tight. I think about it more than I should. She glanced up then, eyes sharp, tired, but somehow piercing straight through me. "You're not supposed to, you know," she murmured, almost to herself. "This, whatever it is, it's wrong. Or at least, it shouldn't be happening." "I can't stop," I whispered, and even saying it aloud sounded absurd. My hands clenched at my sides, fingers twitching, as if grasping at air could make sense of the chaos inside me. Margot stood and walked to the window, fingers resting lightly against the cold glass. Rain dripped from the sill. She didn't turn to look at me. "I can't either," she said finally, almost inaudible. "And that scares me more than anything else." We sat in silence again, the kind that feels heavy and intimate at once. The clock ticked somewhere in the corner, but it was drowned out by the hum of our restrained, dangerous energy. I wanted to say something to bridge the gap, to make the electricity tangible, but every word felt like it would shatter the fragile veneer of normality she desperately clung to. Instead, I watched her. Her fingers traced idle patterns on the windowsill, her lips pressed together as if holding back some private confession. I wanted to cross the room, to close the distance between us, to reach out and anchor us both to something solid. But I stayed frozen, my desire locked in restraint. "You know," she said softly, almost a whisper, turning to face me at last, "we can't pretend anymore. Not this. Not us." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the composure she usually wore like armor. I nodded, words failing me, and she took a step back, shaking her head as if trying to make herself smaller, less real. I don't even know if I want this," she admitted, the vulnerability in her eyes raw, unpolished. "But I can't pretend I don't feel it either. And that's the worst part." Her words hit me like a stone. She was confessing everything we'd been dancing around for weeks. The pull, the longing, the danger of it all. And just like that, the carefully constructed boundaries we'd maintained crumbled under the weight of honesty. I wanted to respond, to tell her it was okay, that I felt the same, but the words stuck in my throat. I could only watch her, breathing shallowly, every tremble of her body and hesitation of her hands magnified in the quiet room. And then, barely audible, she said the line that echoed in me long after. "I don't know who I am anymore. Not when I'm around you." It started with a box she had tucked away under the sofa. I was stretching to grab a blanket, and my fingers brushed the corner of it. Margot froze the second I touched it. "That's old," she said, her voice almost flat, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. "Can I see?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my pulse had jumped. She hesitated, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside were letters, yellowed and fragile, tied together with a faded ribbon. Photos of a younger version of her stared back, a man smiling next to her in some sunlit memory. I noticed the tremor in her hands as she traced his face. "I never throw anything away," she said softly. "It's him." I swallowed, unsure what to say. I'd never known her to speak like this, so quiet, so vulnerable, like she was letting me glimpse a part of herself she hadn't shown anyone in years. "He died?" I asked cautiously. She nodded, lips pressed together, eyes misting. "Car accident. 20 years ago. I don't know. I was supposed to be with him." Her voice caught. I wasn't. Life, it just went on. And I never stopped thinking about what I lost. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to say something comforting, but any words felt clumsy, inadequate. Instead, I reached out, touching her arm lightly. She didn't pull away, but the shiver that ran through her made my stomach twist. "You carry him still," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "I can see it. Every little thing you do, the way you look sometimes, it's like he's still here with you." She looked at me then, really looked, and the layers of composure she usually wore slipped, if only for a heartbeat. I didn't think anyone could see it. Not really. I've buried it so deep. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that remembering wasn't wrong, that grief and longing could coexist with whatever this was between us. But I stayed quiet, letting her breathe in the silence, letting her vulnerability sink in. She picked up one of the photos, staring at it with that same quiet intensity. "I've been waiting for a sign, a reminder that it's okay to feel something again." Her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain, searching, and I felt the gravity of the unspoken pull between us tighten. I didn't know if I should move closer, speak, or simply watch. Her honesty, her rawness, made everything fragile, like one wrong word could shatter the moment. I stayed put, letting her vulnerability speak louder than any gesture I could make. Then she handed me the photo, just for a second, as if testing me, seeing if I could hold the weight of her past. My fingers brushed hers, and I felt the tremor in her hand. A tiny, almost imperceptible spark passed between us. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The air between us had shifted in some profound, subtle way. Something that wasn't a confession, but a quiet acknowledgement of everything buried under the surface. The heartbreak, the longing, the impossible pull. And as I looked at her, her eyes glistening with memory and something else I couldn't name, she whispered, almost like she feared hearing herself. "I don't think I've ever trusted anyone like this before." We didn't speak much that evening. The apartment smelled faintly of rain, and the faint burn of tea leaves left in the pot too long. Margot sat on the couch, knees tucked up, a wool blanket draped over her lap. I perched on the armchair across from her, pretending to read a book, though my eyes kept drifting to her. Somehow, after all the tension, all the almost confessions, the moments we had nearly touched but didn't, it felt natural to just be there. The air was heavy with understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been building for weeks. No words were necessary. She shifted slightly, and our knees brushed. I froze, and she didn't pull away, just let the small contact linger. My hand twitched as if it wanted to close the distance, but I stayed still, letting the moment stretch, letting it exist without forcing it. I'm tired of pretending," she said finally, voice low, careful. "Tired of thinking I should stay contained." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, daring me to respond. "I'm tired too," I admitted. It wasn't a declaration, not yet. Just honesty, simple and human. Tired of waiting, of overthinking. Her lips curved slightly, the faintest shadow of a smile, and she leaned back into the couch, letting the blanket fall a little lower. Our shoulders brushed this time, closer, deliberate. I could feel her warmth, the rhythm of her breathing next to mine. I reached out slowly, almost instinctively, and my hand found hers. Not gripping, not demanding, just resting. She didn't pull away. Instead, she interlaced her fingers with mine, a quiet concession, a mutual decision that neither of us needed to articulate. Time seemed to pause around us. The past heartbreaks, the near misses, the tension, the longing, it all condensed into this single, gentle touch. I realized then that it wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about presence, the quiet intimacy of sharing space, of acknowledging the inevitability that had been creeping up on us for weeks. Margot let out a soft breath, a small laugh slipping past the tension, and I felt the weight in her shoulders lift fractionally. It was fragile, imperfect, but real. We didn't speak, but the silence was full of everything we hadn't said. The near misses, the heartbreak, the spark of desire, the fear, the trust. I brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, careful not to overstep, and she leaned slightly into the motion, eyes closing for a second. That small act, simple and human, sealed the understanding between us. No declarations, no promises, just two people finally allowing themselves to exist in the same space without pretense. We sat together for what felt like hours, hands still intertwined, breathing in sync, letting the quiet swell and settle around us. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing needed to. The connection had finally been earned, patiently, carefully, through all the tension and restraint that had led us here. And as I felt her fingers curl around mine, the smallest, unspoken acknowledgement passing between us, I realized the truth. We didn't need words. We didn't need declarations. The understanding itself was enough. And in that quiet room, with the rain long gone, it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. It's been months since that night, the night we finally let ourselves sit in the quiet together, hands intertwined, no words necessary. I still think about it, sometimes when I'm alone, sometimes when I see her laugh across the bookstore, or catch her eyes in the dim light of her apartment. That silence we shared, that small, earned intimacy, somehow changed everything. I've changed too. I notice the small things now, the hesitation before speaking, the way someone grips a cup when they're nervous, the fleeting moments where a glance can speak volumes. Margot taught me patience, but also how dangerous it is to ignore what you feel. I learned to see without needing to touch, to understand without needing an answer, to exist alongside someone and let them exist alongside me. She's changed, too. I can see it in the way she moves through her days, lighter somehow, a little less burdened by the ghost she carries. She laughs more easily, rests more fully, and I know she allows herself to feel things she once thought were off-limits. Our connection isn't about passion or perfection. It's about presence, and that has made it stronger than anything I could have anticipated. We still stumble. We still hesitate. But the fear that used to paralyze us has softened into something more honest. Respect for what's between us. Trust that we can navigate it without rushing, without pretending it's simple. There's beauty in the patience, in the waiting, in the understanding that love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly, imperceptibly, until one day you realize it has been there all along. I think about the rain that first night we almost crossed a line, about the cafe, the box of old letters, the moments where words failed and silence spoke instead. I can still feel her hand brushing mine, her breath catching when something almost escaped, the tension in her shoulders dissolving just a fraction as trust grew. It's memory, yes, but it's also a blueprint for what love can be, flawed, patient, deeply human. And now, when I see her, it isn't about longing or fear. It's about recognition, about knowing that what we share, however complicated, however imperfect, is ours. It's something I can hold on to without trying to define it too rigidly. Something real. The truth is, I never expected to learn so much from someone I wasn't supposed to have. But life rarely cares about rules. It teaches you anyway, in whispers and glances, in tiny acts of trust and courage. And I carry those lessons with me every day. So, if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?